Sicario 2 Soldado, or Day of the Soldado if you live in America, is a direct sequel to 2015's Sicario, and also sees Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro returning in their respective roles. Now, I'm going to start off by being brutally honest. After rewatching and reviewing the original Sicario just the other day, I didn't really see the point in them ever making a sequel to it, because that first movie works so well on its own, and doesn't even warrant or even hint at the chance of a sequel. So the fact that this sequel exists is a little bit baffling to say the least. But I suppose the studio's got to make money somehow. The one thing that did intrigue me though, is the fact that Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro did return for this sequel, and they were easily some of the best aspects of that first movie. Unfortunately, Emily Blunt doesn't, but still you have 2 out of the 3 great cast members from the first, so at least they've got something right off the bat. I suppose the first real positive I have to say about this movie is that the performances are still really good. Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro deliver just as good performances that they did in the last one, but that being said, I do think both their characters and their performances were a lot better in the first film, mainly because in the original Sicario, there was a sense of mystery and intrigue to their job roles, and what exactly their roles consisted of, and whether it was completely by the books or not. That's what made their characters so intriguing and interesting in the first film. In this movie, because all that mystery and intrigue was set up in the first film, we just straight up see what they do, and all that mystery is gone, which is a shame. I suppose you're gonna get that in a sequel like this, but I would have liked some form of that mystery from the first film to maintain in their characters in this one, like to carry over into the sequel. I get that you can't really do that, but I would have liked a little bit of that mystery to, still be there. But that being said, their performances are still really good. Benicio del Toro is fantastic in this movie. He gets a lot more screen time than he did in the first film. And in some ways, he actually does drive the movie forward. I think he was really good in this film. You get to learn more about his character, which again links back to the lack of mystery in their characters anymore. But that being said, it works for the sake of his character. What you learn about his character is really heartfelt, and it really does get to the emotions at points. Josh Brolin is also really good in this movie as well. This seems to be the year of Brolin, doesn't it? Avengers Infinity War, Deadpool 2, and now Sicario 2. He's on a roll, and he really is amazing in this movie. His character is just as likeable as it was in the first movie, but there is a sense of both seriousness and menace added to his character this time, which I thought was a nice change of pace. There are a few times where the seriousness of his character does kind of take away from what he was in the first, but it's nothing too drastic. I overall liked where his character went, and again, like Benicio del Toro's character, you do feel for him at points in the movie. You also have these 2 younger characters, a young girl and a young boy, that are supposed to represent the 2 different sides of the cartels, and again, I thought that aspect of the film was really good and really well integrated into the movie. I did prefer the girl's story and her performance over the boys, because I just found it a little bit more interesting. But the way that they interweave into the overarching plot of the film is really well executed, and I like the payoff that it had towards the end of the movie. I also like this movie a lot from a technical aspect. It's nowhere near as good as the first movie. Just want to get that out there. The first movie had Denis Villeneuve as director, Roger Deakins as cinematographer, and Johan Johansson as composer, and neither of those 3 returned for this movie. And that's completely understandable, but the one thing I liked about this movie is that it obviously tries to pay homage to the original's style and sound, and it does it in a really effective way. You can tell that this isn't Deacon's cinematography or it's not Johansson's music, but you can tell that these are faithful reimaginings of the exact same style of how they approached it. And I really thought that was a nice touch to the movie because, one, it felt as if it was in the same universe as the original Sicario, which is good. It kept up a consistent tone. And also, I just liked how seeing some of these things, like seeing a Deakins-esque shot in the film, would be like, oh, that's a nice touch to the original. Or hearing themes from Johansson's original score would be like, oh, that reminds me of the original. And it's just little touches like that that were kind of nice to see every so often in this movie. Like I said, it's nowhere near as good as how the original is executed, but I still like that they tried their best to pay homage to it. Now, this movie is not perfect by any means, and unfortunately it's one of those films that somehow gets worse as it goes on. Just let me explain. The first act of this movie is incredible. It grabs your attention and kind of shakes you. It's shocking, it's really well done, and I was immediately invested. The second act, not as good as the first, but still really entertaining and adds a lot of intense moments to the movie, and is, again, really good. But then the third act happens, and you have two major problems that happen within that third act. First of all, the pacing grounds to a halt. In the first two acts, there is a fairly consistent, on-the-go pace that keeps you invested. But then the third act kicks in, and then everything slows down to a ridiculous level to the point where it starts to get a little bit tedious and boring. But then something happens. I won't explain what it is, because spoilers obviously, but something happens within the last 15 to 20 minutes of the movie that completely ruined the entire film for me. Mainly because the rest of the movie sets up an incredibly realistic and gritty tone that feels as if it could be happening right now. But then the last 5 to 10 minutes happen, and it's the most bullshit thing I've seen in a movie for quite some time. If the rest of the movie had established a bit more of a tongue-in-cheek, not really taking itself seriously kind of tone and style, then maybe I would not be as harsh on that ending as I am. But it doesn't. It sets up a realistic and incredibly gritty tone, so when the bullshit does happen, it's really out of place, and unfortunately, that's all I can't stop thinking about. Yes, there are bits in the movie that happen earlier on that are good, and that I like, and that I remember, but unfortunately, if you told me to recount something that happens in Sicario 2, I'm immediately going to go to that bullshit thing that happens at the end, because it's stuck in my head, and it's just annoyingly stupid. Also, going back to the point that I made earlier about the pacing, yes, you can have a slow pace in a movie like this. I mean, just look at the first movie. The first movie was criticised by some, myself included, initially for having a really slow pace. But when I saw that movie again, the slow pace actually really worked. It set up a sense of tension and suspense throughout the entire movie, even when there really wasn't much happening. And in the first movie, you had encounters with Emily Blunt's character and the two other characters of Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro to keep that suspense going. She was the only sane, normal person who thought she was doing the job properly and by the books, who you saw the movie through. So when she encounters Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro, because she's not quite sure as to about how they're going about their job, you know, that kept your interest going throughout the quieter moments, as well as that slow pace, keeping a sense of tension throughout the entire runtime. Here, like I said a minute ago, you have a pretty consistent, relatively fast pace going throughout the first two acts, and then it just grounds to a halt in the third, which is a shame, because like I said, the first 2 acts are really good, the first being fantastic. But then that third act just really slows down and became really hard to get through, just because of one, not much really happens, and 2, that bullshit thing that I can't get out of my head. In the end, I'm going to give Sicario 2 a 7 out of 10. It would have been a bit higher if it wasn't for that bullshit of an ending. Like I said, the first movie does not hint at a sequel whatsoever. So the fact that this movie exists was a little bit baffling, but I was intrigued to see where they would carry the story on to. The end of this movie is incredibly sequel baity, which is a shame, because it kind of defeats everything that the first movie did. But that being said, the rest of the movie is really good, and I would say just go and watch the movie for those first 2 acts alone, because they are incredible. So guys, that was my review of Sicario 2 Soldado. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, then give it a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Bye.